We have the UR panel for the entire Inspire convening about to come up. And we're excited about this one. I know you are too, because we've asked this panel to take everything that we've covered over the last 2 days in the panels and the hot seats in each one of the breakout sessions and bring it all together, integrate it, make it make sense. And so that's exactly what their charge is. They're finding out for the first time. But we're here. Please join me in welcoming our panel, which is on the unchanging role of the faculty, but with some punctuation marks that makes us, at least opens the door to the question. And so we're excited to have an expert panel on this to follow up and to bring it all home for us. First, it will be moderated by Shawn Whalen, who's the Chief of Staff at San Jose State University. We'll be joined by Carmen Bustos-Works, the Associate Vice President for Academic Programs, the Dean of Undergraduate and Graduate Studies, and Professor of Chemistry at Cal Poly Humboldt. By Scott Hoshida, faculty at Berkeley City College, Yvette Gullatt, Vice President and Vice Provost of Graduate, Undergraduate, and Equity Affairs at UC Office of the President, and Kimberly Tanner, Professor of Biology at San Francisco State. So please welcome all from Northern California, our closeout panel.
Well, we are still standing, and thank you very much for holding the line and staying with us for this last panel. We have the good fortune of being joined by some of the most important minds on the role of faculty in California. So I'm thrilled to have this conversation with them. Given the nature, I had to come in late last night, so I missed it yesterday, but I've gotten the impression that things are pretty spicy in some of the earlier panels, and we want to make sure that we live up to the spiciness. So I'm going to start with a question for our panelists that, as a former Senate chair, I sometimes have nightmares about blurting something out that was controversial in front of a large group of faculty and having to own that. So I'm going to say, of all the things that you were thinking about as you prepared your thoughts about what kinds of changes you might recommend in the role of faculty, which one would you be most anxious about blurting out in that kind of context? Carmen, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, what's interesting is I hadn't been anxious about this before until I blurted it out a couple times and got a lot of pushback and realized that it was a third rail, and that was just get rid of grades. And what's interesting is that Michael brought that up right away during our time here. So maybe it wasn't as controversial as the pushback I get on my campus.
Well, mine's a little different because I'm an administrator, and so, I never stay up late at night thinking about things that could go wrong. But my first thought was, we ain't ready.
But faculty love being told what to do by
administrators. They really do. But my thought was, we ain't ready. We ain't ready. And what I mean is that the change that we keep talking about is in front of us is actually already here. And our institutions are ill-prepared to support the faculty to do the kinds of things that they need to do. And I don't think anybody, we want to move forward as a faculty, we want to be have interdisciplinarity, we want to be innovative and creative, but the institutions aren't moving at the same pace. And I think there's going to be a lot of gaps and frustration and lack of momentum.
I don't know if this is something, I don't feel afraid of blurting things out at the faculty senate meeting. Maybe that's just kind of the luck of having a relatively small college that gets along. But I do think, like, kind of in this space, we have faculty. Well, maybe one thing I'd be kind of embarrassed about is, like, I don't have a PhD, so I just have a master's in fine arts, which makes me feel sometimes a little bit less qualified to be a teacher. But I don't think that's true in the end. But one thing, as we're having all these different people come to talk to us about generative AI, which is really on our minds right now, I'm always like, who else needs to be in the room? And I'm thinking like, we want our students here to help us co-design. Like, I know I'm becoming a bit of a Luddite. I'm like, I can't adopt everything as quickly as I would like to. You know, over time, like at the beginning of your career, you're like, I will adopt every new thing that is there. And then you get to a stage where you're like, wow, I've adopted a lot of things and I can't get rid of some of those things, so I'm gonna hold on to them. And then maybe I'm not at the end, so I'm sort of in the middle where I'm kind of starting to feel like I'm gonna wait to see. And I need people to help us build these guardrails. So those are students who really need to be in the room. I also think that we've had a lot of industry or capital here, maybe selling us stuff. I'm trying to get us to buy into things, and I think that's important to hear from them. I'm excited about it, but I think we need to have labor here too. People, and it was mentioned in the middle of the day, like for unions as an organized body, actually have some power to maybe say, what are the things that we ought to be worried about? How do we organize ourselves to talk about that? Just so we have all the people in the room to have that discussion. I think that would be, I don't know if that's controversial at our particular college, but I think I could see it being controversial in other places for sure.
Kimberly?
Yeah, so I'm an unintentional professor of biology, so I'll speak from a STEM perspective. And I too tend to blurt things out, so I don't know if there's much I wouldn't blurt out. But I will share an anecdote that two full tenured professors shared to me at one point, and they said, Kimberly, come over here. We pretend to teach, and students pretend to learn, and then we hand out grades, and then we do it over again the next term. And that was really a deeply profound observation. I'm really proud of my colleagues for surfacing that. But I think that generative AI and lots of these things are just bringing to the fore some things that we've known for a long time. And I am the biggest supporter of faculty. I'm very known for that, have the backs of my colleagues. In our systems, and I will say it's somewhat different across different systems, but I'll say in the CSU, and I would say probably UCs, our faculty colleagues are selected and hired because of their disciplinary expertise and prowess, and then they are parachuted into classrooms all over the state with virtually no support in learning how to translate what they know and teach that to novices, which is, I think, very, very unfair, and that's part of what's gotten us in this situation. But we don't acknowledge it, and we still continue in many ways to make decisions about what happens in classrooms that have very little to do with students and learning and a lot more to do with our status in universities.
Wow, that's a good spot to pivot a little bit. When you think about the support it takes both to learn the job when you're new and the lack of support that there might be for changing the way you do. And so let's pivot to the change question. Lots of things in the environment are changing. We've talked about new technologies. Enrollment for some is up, enrollment for others is down. The student population and their attention spans, et cetera, have been talked about as changing. In light of those changes, how do you see the shifts that are necessary to be an effective faculty member? And Scott, you lead a group called The Changing Approach, as I understand it, at your district. Can you talk a little bit about how you come to that question?
Yeah, I think the way I kind of see it is but we need to both be new learners again, right? To learn something new, and that's hard. Because oftentimes the reason folks are in academia for the most part is we were actually probably, for the most part, kind of good in school. We had a good experience. We want to go back to the institutions that have served us in some way. Maybe you might have had some trouble here, but you had some success. But then with this new stuff coming in, new dictates around equity, around not grading, the very thing that we were good at, AI, generative AI, all these things, we don't know. So not only are we we are apprentices to whom, right? We don't have anybody necessarily to lead us directly. And so I think we have to kind of maybe shift to becoming learners again in a different way in fields that are not our own, from people who may not have the same kind of expertise that we have. We often align ourselves in discipline around kind of different kind of designations. So we might actually have to look to people who are not like us to learn. So I think that's really hard. That's the first thing. The other is, I think, a lot of times we think of ourselves as kind of the discipline is the thing that we are, right? And I think that's great. We want to have expertise. We have people who love writing or love science, right? That's the curiosity. That's what you're looking for. I was actually just in a lecture. It was definitely a sage on the stage moment. And like we were like, we don't want to do the sage on the stage, but I was just relaxing into this brilliant lecture of someone who inspired me, right? I felt something that was different. And I'm like, oh, that's something that's really powerful. I hadn't felt that in a while. So in addition to being masters of our own disciplines, not just being staged on stage, but being good at that, but also being really good educational designers, I think we need to become stewards of this system. And what I mean is like that we all are, this is a common good. This is a collective effort. And somehow faculty need to begin to shift how they think about not just the classroom, but about the colleges and the impact on society, that we are kind of stewarding this natural resource or this whole resource for the good of the state and the community, and some people have even said the world. So I think that's a small shift in how faculty might need to think. That's a long journey maybe for some people, but I think it's super, super important.
Could I add to something that Scott said? I think we have to add to that, we have to reposition the support for those expectations, right? And so as we gather this new information, we develop this new knowledge, we have to think and learn together. And that means thinking across the disciplines and thinking across the systems, right? Because this is a challenge that we have in common, and that the result of this could be a common good. And if we don't rethink the rewards for that, then what we're going to do is push out the very people who are being creative and being innovative, and we'll be left with much less than we started with. And so I think if we're not coupling both the new expectations of faculty with repositioning and reassessing the rewards and incentives that go along with that, we run the risk of actually disillusioning and pushing out the very faculty that we need.
Can I ask
Yeah, I was going to pivot to you, Carmen.
Well, I'm curious because there's also some things I've heard throughout the last couple of days, and then just some things that are contradictory in my head that I'm trying to wrestle with. So we say that faculty want to be interdisciplinary, but then at the same time you said they're experts, right? And that their identity is tied with their expertise, and they don't want to do something different. So to me, those are two contradictory statements, and so I'm curious how those come together. And then the other piece is that we do have faculty who are early adopters of technology and changes, and they're always signing up. And I was in, I think it was Michelle's session that said, well, we're going to get the certain number of faculty every time we have professional development for new things that show up, right? So we do have faculty that will continue to show up to be trained and doing new things that embrace that change, that are early adopters. And so I'm just putting those pieces out there for the conversation to think about, right? Because we have an interdisciplinary program on our campus. It's called the Individualized Degree Program, and we're getting a lot of pushback from faculty saying, we don't want that for our students if it's going to take students away from our major, right? And so then we have this other push and pull of, we need students to be in certain disciplines for those disciplines to survive.
Well, and speaking of that, both you and Kimberly were first-generation college students, if I got that right, and you're both professors in STEM, and kind of broke ground as you did that work in your lifetimes. How does that student journey that you all had inform your thinking about what it takes to be a good faculty mentor for the populations you see in your classrooms now? Kimberly, you want to?
Yeah, I think that an enormous amount of the kind of collective work that I've been able to do with faculty who I think are essential to everything we've talked about. Sometimes I feel like these systems want to go around faculty, or sort of like, we don't want to deal with the faculty. Is that it is really about teaching the students in front of you, right? And it's about trying to support faculty and embracing a teaching identity. I've been struck at how little I hear the word teacher, right, as a noun in these conversations. We hear instructor, we hear professor. I spent an early part of my career in K through 12 education, and so that might influence it. But I think for a lot of my colleagues, it is a risk to embrace the teaching identity in higher education. And I will say that varies across the system. So, and I also think that it perhaps is more relevant for people not in this room and not in this conference, right? Because we are a highly selective group. But I will have faculty who will say, oh, Kimberly, this is really great. Active learning, think, pair, shares, collecting assessment for every student, every class. Like, that sounds great, but I can't do that. I'm like, why? And they're like, because if somebody walks by my classroom and they don't see that I'm telling students everything I know, they'll think I'm not a good scientist, right? They never say they won't think I'm a good teacher, but that somehow if you don't stand up and demonstrate you have the credentials of your discipline every class, every time, then you're not a good scientist. And so I've been kind of perplexed at this very consistent message about our professional identity and the power we hold, at least in STEM as scientists, but I would hypothesize as academics, as professors, is driving many more teaching decisions than the students sitting in front of folks in class, not because they're malintentioned, but because that's the pressure. I think in the previous panel, someone said, and I apologize if I misquote, all of us question the 5-paragraph essay, but we all feel the pressure to do it, right? I just hear it in some form like everywhere I turn. So I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, but a huge amount of, I think, what I've tried to bring to it is to give people the license to be a teacher and give people the license to remember what it was like to be a student. Everyone has their own stories of feeling imposter syndrome, exclusion, silly, stupid, like confused. And if I can get faculty back in that space of empathizing with students, they blossom. They just try all sorts of things and they're just amazing teachers, but that is not generally the space that they're in.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of fear. Mm-hmm. Like I think even just hearing, like there's a disciplinary fear of like not having students and not being able to have like a position in the college, but there's also the fear of not looking like an expert or, and it's that kind of fear, that feeling that really I think that stymies a lot of change in higher education. It's maybe how we were taught, but it's also kind of the weird part about being an expert, right? Is that you can lose your prestige in some way, and that loss, that fear of that loss. Anytime you have privilege and you start to lose it a little bit, it's an acute fear that you kind of feel, right? And I feel like that's one of the things that we're trying to, like, how do you get around that? I don't have an answer, but I know that if we know it's fear, then we have to figure out ways to unlock or be aware of. I mean, I'm just thinking of like, even during this whole conference, like, I'm excited. I'm scared as, you know what? I'm tired right now. Understanding our emotional swings in the middle of making decisions is really important. So, yeah.
I'm struck by the last panel toward the end, there was a discussion about the importance of agency, human agency. And what I'm hearing here is that there's a challenge for people to exercise that agency and active political power pushing against people who want to work on their teaching. Is that
Well, if I can go back to what Kimberly was saying, and we share another interesting fun fact, which is Kimberly is a professor at the university that I got my bachelor's in both psychology and chemistry from, and it was a wonderful place, San Francisco State University, right? It changed my whole life. The CSU changed my whole life, and it's interesting because we were talking about prestige between the different universities, and I'm like, you know what? I don't know where everybody else went to college. Should I not say I'm from San Francisco State? I know, I'm gonna be proud of that. But I left to go get a PhD in chemistry, and I remember my professor saying, because I was terrified, and I said I should stay here and do my master's, and she said, that would be great for me, but you should go get your PhD in chemistry. That would be better for you. And I said, okay, I will go, and I will come back to the CSU and teach. And when I was at UC Santa Barbara working on my PhD, every message I received was that going back to a teaching university would be a mistake, that I needed to become a scientist at a research one institution. At the time, I don't think I knew what that meant, but I think that kind of touches on some of the things that you said. But I didn't listen. I went to teaching college, and I ended up at Sonoma State University for a long time before transitioning to Cal Poly Humboldt.
So I want to just take a quick poll of the audience. How many people have heard that story before? Yep. Okay. All right. We're going to move on into, hopefully, more energizing space, but we'll find out. All right. with all that in mind and the recognition that at least partially the community of faculty structure the universe that creates threats to change, at least in part. What are the conversations that you're hearing amongst faculty that give you hope that the evolving role of faculty will meet the needs of the students that we serve?
You know, I wouldn't say it's a controversial thought, but what has been refreshing about the last couple of days has been certainly the conversation about the role that AI and all of these tools can play, but also the importance of the human-centered classroom. And I think if there's anything that's revolutionary in AI, it'll force this reckoning with what does that student-centered, human-centered classroom look like. And I think that actually gives faculty a lot of agency, right? To say AI is a means to an end, not the end in and of itself. And what we are using and what we are developing is the classroom of the future that is grounded in our agency, our students' agency, and that experience. It might look different. The kinds of questions, assessments, grades, if they're there at all, might look different. But at the end of the day, it's our agency, our students' agency at the core. And I think that's what AI forces us to think about in ways we might have taken for granted before this moment.
Other reactions to hot topics?
Well, one thing from the last panel I just want to say, and I don't know if this is off topic at all or on the same topic, but the archival research came up, right? And I know it was on humanities, but scientists spend like the first 2 years, or at least the first year of your PhD journey in the library looking up all the research, right? And I just thought, oh gosh, if ChatGPT could just find all those articles, like why would we not do that?
Because your literature reviews would all look the same.
Well, we all have different topics, so, because in the humanities, I got it, okay. Because in science, we have to do a set of experiments that nobody else has done before. But so you have to find what everyone's done in order to do something different. And you spend a lot of time pulling books off the shelf, at least I did, right? And then you moved into electronic databases, but it still seems like a lot of human hours that could be saved for other things than typing in ruthenium, saline, nitrosyl compounds or something.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, people would come up to me and be like, Kimberly, you use so much technology in your teaching, and I don't really ever feel like I was that person, but I am all for AI. I think it's going to have so many interesting implications and a fabulous tool like any other tool in the toolbox. And at least in my field, I think that the battle often is between like, we have so much content to cover. And it's like, yes, but we need to bring students' assets into the classroom, and we need to honor their dreams and coach them towards their careers and make this connect to their home community. And those two things should not be mutually exclusive, but they're portrayed as being mutually exclusive. And I think that some of the things around generative AI are very useful for me in my work, because they're getting faculty to be like, well, if students can look it all up, then like, you know, why should I spend time on all this content? And we have a ton of evidence that when you measure, which we don't measure very much, how much people retain just a week after a class is over, right? It's a very low number. I'm happy to give you the papers. It's a very low number. And so I believe in learning. I believe that there are important things in biology people should know, but we generally are asking students in the first year to learn more biology, more chemistry, more physics, and more math than any of the biology faculty, or frankly, science faculty, know. So, great study to do. Can we all actually pass without looking anything up 70% of the content on an intro exam?
Yeah.
Right? Take it to upper division. Like, I'm not against content. I literally got really sick, and everyone that I interacted with in the medical area around me was an alum of my biology class. I firmly believe people should learn some biology, but they can't learn biology if we want them to learn more than any experts know. And so why do I say all this? I think that things around generative AI are going to help me in helping my colleagues really prioritize what is it we really need people to know versus what is it they've had in 4th grade, 7th grade, 10th grade, another high school class, and we're gonna try again. And I'm not even clear why they need to know this. But because the person down the hall is like, oh, you have to teach this, then I'm gonna do it. And I'll just give a huge shout out to my community college colleagues. It's come up several times. But we in the CSUs, and I will really, really invite my colleagues in the UCs, absolutely must lead this change, because my colleagues in community colleges are bound to course outlines that do not reflect what is actually taught in UCs or CSUs.
Yeah.
And they are at the whim of oftentimes single professors in those institutions who decide there needs to be more prerequisites or there needs to be more content. And so anyway, this is where I'm trying to, it's the end of the conference, but content, let's talk content.
Yeah.
And how generative AI can help us move past that part of the conversation and prioritize content.
So yeah, go ahead.
I was just
Scott.
going to jump in, just like, thank you for kind of energizing me a little bit, because I can feel myself going like, oh, you know, what are the dangers? What are the promises? So when we are excited and motivated, I mean, even just looking at the room, people are here at the end of the day on Friday. We hear like wanting to kind of keep talking about this stuff. I work with the Learning Lab and my colleagues here on stage across different intersegmental places. Like, these are the spaces that this stuff can happen, right? There's a threat. How we respond to the threat, how do we help each other, how do we work with our students and communities to do it, it's exciting in those nice moments when you're feeling good about it. And I think that's really important to kind of maybe figure out ways to build on that threat in a positive way that can generate stuff. I know at our college, like when it came out, the last generative, or it came out in like last fall, there are a series of meetings where people are really freaked out. But it also brings people to the table that otherwise kind of just sit in their offices, right? So there is something about that is interesting, and I don't think we want to lean just into the fear or just into like, oh, it's going to be great and everything's going to be rosy either. But if we can find that path through that we do together in some way, that might kind of shift what we're trying to do, both like in the classroom, but also as a system. So I'm looking, yeah, I think that's some promises there.
I'll call out that I'm hearing that there is an undercurrent that there might be some need to carve out time for faculty to make the change that needs to be made in order to deliver on student success.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Faculty metrics. That change, the people that make that change don't get rewarded in our professional system.
To a point made earlier that when you have a student success project, the same faculty show up. And how do I think cracking the nut on how you bring everybody in the larger faculty into those circles is a challenge too.
So I just want to give a shout out here, because I will just shout out my own fabulous department. We disagree on tons of things, but you know, I think the first thing is to make the assumption that every one of our colleagues cares about teaching and learning.
Yeah.
And when I make that assumption, it is never wrong. It is just never wrong. And I would ask you to make a prediction quietly in your brain. I'm going to give you 2 seconds. What percentage of 60 biology faculty at San Francisco State, I will say 85% of them trained at Stanford, UCSF, UC Davis, UC Santa Cruz, and who am I forgetting? UCSF, me, that's working. Those 60 people, like what percentage of them would spend 100 hours kind of working together to get better at our teaching over the course of just 2 years? And you just think, what percentage is a number? Don't say it out loud. I don't have a clicker. So when I ask that question at the beginning of a seminar, people are like, 15%, you and a few people, Kimberly, which I think is often the perception. Other people will be like, 30%, because I showed them that that's about the number. 30% of our faculty are part-time lecturers, right, or some long-term lecturers. And the number is 85%. I don't think that our department is magic. All we did was assume good intentions, work as a team collaboratively, right, so that was part of the reward. And the last thing I will say on it is that the first time we were all together, and this was all funded by a grant, so kudos to funders, right? This was funded by a grant, was that when we said, hey, what's the most surprising thing about our gathering today? This was at the beginning of like a 5-day institute, which we don't do it that long anymore. What was most surprising? What'd you learn? The top 3 things. If you coded that, the number one thing that was said by faculty was, I didn't know this many people in our department cared about teaching. that is just the lowest bar ever. Like, all I had to do was order lunch and get people in a room. So I just feel like the collective power, I appreciate the skepticism, but I think faculty care. I think we should leverage faculty. We should really embrace them and celebrate them, and we should have them working as teams because that takes away a lot of the fear.
So let me ask this. I'm not going to let you get away with that much optimism without throwing a stone your way. So the definition of student success is evolving for institutions of higher education. The measurements and metrics that are being asked of us are forever moving down the road a little bit, including into what kinds of jobs do your students get when they graduate, what kind of wages do they earn, and it would not surprise me to hear that many faculty feel like that's not them, but who should own student success more so than the faculty? So that's sort of the premise of my question. And so then, will faculty own student success? And if so, what will it mean in the future?
Can I start on that? Because I feel like there's kind of two things in there, so if I can tear them apart. First of all, everybody at the university should own student success. Everything we do should be student-centered because the institutions wouldn't be there without students, right? And so, and if it's, these faculty-initiated student success pieces that are supported by administration, supported by support staff, then we can move these things forward. But then you're asking a different question, which you're right. Now we've got accreditation agencies coming in and saying, okay, not only do we want to know, do your programs make sense? Do your assessments make sense? Are students graduating? What do they get jobs and how much do they make? And can that information be readily available? And I think it's wrong to say, well, can faculty just figure that out too? Can the alumni office figure that out, right? And so it's got to be owned by somebody because the accreditors are asking for it, but it brings up this whole other piece, which is what does post-secondary success for students look like? And I can tell you what the accredited agencies are saying is it means jobs, right? But I don't know that everybody at the institution or even in this room would agree that that's the definition.
Full disclosure, I'm a WASC commissioner. Continue.
Okay. Would you agree that that is post-secondary success?
Well, that everyone should own student success, but that there are portions of students or parts of facets of student success that are particularly in the faculty domain.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a really, wouldn't it be great if we could look across all of these, use large language models to gather this information and determine what things really matter for students. Look at those patterns and then sort of divvy up what parts of student success belong to which parts of the institution. Because I don't think faculty should be responsible for it all, but everyone should be responsible for student success holistically.
Yes.
But
well, in that one part where, if you're going to track alumni to then figure that out, I think some people have the attitude, well, faculty know their alumni, so they'll track them, they'll find them, and they'll ask them if they have a job, and then we'll put that into a database. But I totally agree on these other pieces, and I think that's just a lot to ask for faculty on top of everything else that they're doing.
So let me put a little bit of a pragmatic spin on the question. If we're working to make sure that our students have the awareness and ability to utilize contemporary technologies, because we know that's a demand in the workforce, and we know that experiential learning and partnerships with industry are critical to getting students, especially low-income and underrepresented student populations, successfully into the workforce pipeline. It would sound to me like an individual faculty member needs to create an industry partnership and get training on technology and be able to deliver that training to their students in every course that they teach. And I know that you all teach many classes every semester, and all of them would be potentially need to be redesigned to accommodate those two things with brand new corporate partnerships and brand new technologies integrated every semester. What time is there in faculty life to make that happen?
So I'm going to say that you laid out a very particular version of that, right, with a lot of underlying assumptions, and I appreciate that, and I will respond to that. but I think that there are so many modest changes in what we do that we have lots of evidence can really flip student success, especially for students from marginalized backgrounds along a lot of social identities. And so I want to go back to we're supposed to be synthetic, to the very first panel, and one of my colleagues said, I really think this is about trust, right? We need to restore that faculty or instructors trust that students are there to learn and that students trust them that they're there to help them, and I'm going to add words to my colleague, pursue their hopes and their dreams. I think if we somehow move back in the space where we don't teach only disciplines, right? We do teach disciplines, but we teach students, right? We teach students, then faculty have license to integrate those kinds of things. I mean, some of our best courses are service learning courses that are partnerships with community partners, right? That's something you can do in an upper division kind of way. Some of our best courses actually are where we have students that are partnered with faculty to help re-envision the course from a student's perspective. And that is a 4-unit course that counts towards the biology major. Go San Francisco State, right? There are wonderful scholars in the world that are really focusing on students as under-leveraged partnerships in all this. There is a huge divide between instructors, and I'm getting further and further away the older I get, and students, right? And so trying to bridge that divide with students as our collaborators seems really important. And then the last thing I'll say is that I think really modest changes in what a classroom looks and feels like. I think about this space a lot as a classroom, and this classroom makes me really uncomfortable. Because in my classroom, which is actually, as my intro bio class has more students than people in this room, we have about half the space, we would not be here for an hour without my students talking at least 4 times with a neighbor about what they think about what's going on, right? So every student gets a chance to talk to somebody else multiple times every class. Mm-hmm. Students in those courses get to connect what they're learning to their home community, right? So even if they don't have a partnership, they connect it in their homework assignments and what we're studying to their career aspirations and their home communities. And then third, you collect assessment evidence from every student, every class. And that assessment evidence is not just about concepts, it's about how people are experiencing the class. And you don't grade all of it, but you read it and it informs what you do. I think that there are very modest ways that absolutely student success is integrated into what faculty do. And there are absolutely ways to measure that on shorter timescales than maybe what we're talking about.
That's great. Scott, can you add about community colleges? Because it seems like for a faculty that are on the average teaching 5 classes a semester, that there might be unique challenges in that space and unique innovations, as Kimberly highlighted.
So I think I agree. Student success what happens is a lot of times we take on the success of a student individually, and that's where the burden and the stress and the burnout kind of happens, when it needs to be a collective effort, right? The team idea, distributing that success across the system, and actually building a team that is working together in a way that is looking at the data, making strategic decisions together around AI and its guardrails, around all these different kind of issues. And I know the question about whether we land jobs on the backside of college is one of the kind of value propositions. I actually learned that word as a part of this, working with these folks. I was like, what is a value proposition? That's not, is that something we teach in English composition? I don't like the word, but I've been kind of flipping on the head a little. I want to flip it on its head a little bit. I was talking to a colleague from San Jose State he used to teach with me in the Peralta Community Colleges and actually did a tour of other community colleges around. And he has a book coming out in a couple of years, or maybe in a year, about what it's like. What is it like to teach in community colleges, right? Just trying to understand these institutions, because they're not very well known. There's a lot of, the prestige question we ask a lot, but we don't, unless you work in it, unless you're kind of running around and hearing what other people do, there's not a lot of publications about it. There's not a lot of what's going on, other than the TV show. Which I used to cringe at is hard, but I feel like maybe there's a better TV show out there. That's what we should do. No, okay. But maybe what if the value proposition is that we actually start experimenting with something like universal basic income for community college students who come, who are under-resourced in some way, shape, or form? What if we said, we will pay you to go to school? This is so valuable to our state. We know that the outcomes of you getting a job, your health outcomes, all those things are so powerful that we will invest in you. I think we could switch that around a little bit. Rather than we being responsible for the job outcome on the backside, which I think is a good question asked. I think there's the right kind of set of teams could do some of that. Maybe not one faculty. But if we actually started thinking about like how do we get people in and how do we get them to stay and to believe? Because I do think the whole job thing it's a little bit of a bait and switch. We want you to get a job. We want you to be financially stable. But what else do you get when you go to college? You get a community. You build an identity. You get friendships. You meet mentors. You sit in classrooms with people who have different political beliefs than you, and you have to sit through that difficulty. You have to figure out how to have conversations with them, which is the core kind of issue that we're facing in this country right now. Like if we believe in public education as a public good beyond just industry and jobs, we have to figure out how to get people in there so we can have those broader conversations. I just went door knocking in Reno and had some uncomfortable conversations. And I was thinking like, what would it be like to have students from different political backgrounds sitting in my classroom trying to talk through this stuff? And I feel like, yes, we need to do it, and yes, it'd be difficult, but that's also part of our mission. So I think like maybe we kind of we can maybe think about these kind of things a little bit differently, and that might be inspiring to the broader public about how do we support and build new belief in this system a little bit differently.
Yeah.
And have student success metrics beyond compliance. Because I would ask Carmen, when you were at Santa Barbara getting your PhD, and if you had decided to go a different path, would you have been a success for that program?
Interesting. I'm sure I would have been, right? I would have graduated, I would have gotten my PhD, so I think regardless of where I would have gone, I would have been a success for the
If you
program.
hadn't gone into the professoriate, would they have considered you a success?
Well, if I had gone into industry or started a startup, and especially if I gave them back money, absolutely.
But again, right, so we have to have a much more elastic set of student success outcomes that aren't just limited to the ones that are based in compliance.
And the reality is we don't have control of of employment, right?
Yeah.
That's
Exactly.
capital and industry a lot of times. And so I feel like to put us on the hook for that is like kind of maybe a stretch. I think we should be looking at the data for sure and making adjustments as we kind of go. But to be a defining kind of characteristic of how we define our success might be, I think, problematic and complicated.
I have a question for you all about that. I'm just thinking about this because we do get some pushback from people looking at our institutions, and they want to know that. They want to know how many students graduated and got jobs and how much do they make. That informs their decision sometimes of where they put students.
Return on investment is at the forefront of enrollment decisions for students and their parents. And so having an answer to that question, and I think you presented a great one, Scott, is important. The return on investment is more than just the job and the income, but it is that and more. Sensitive to the time, we're moving to the lightning round. It's going to be lightning. And for the audience, your questions are going to have an opportunity as soon as this is over. So get them ready. So the first one is, what's the single most important thing that faculty can do to improve student success? Carmen?
Find multiple ways to show students that they are smart and they can believe in themselves.
Yvette?
Establish instructor presence.
Scott?
To care about students and their classes, to remain curious in the face of difficulty, to remain curious about students, and to build community, connections with other people. I think those are the three things.
Kimberly?
Make decisions in classrooms that are tightly tied to the students sitting in front of you who are not underprepared, and teach.
All right. All right, so number 2, what's the one thing that should not change relative to how faculty do their jobs? Carmen?
Would you start with me again?
Yeah, why not?
Academic freedom.
I would echo that.
Yeah, I would echo that as well. But I think also this idea of care and maybe the other thing to think about is for ourselves a little bit, and trying to find our way through all of this.
I feel like lots of things need to change. I really struggle with this question. I'm an unintentional professor, I came here because I think that they're good people and they need a lot of support in changing a lot of things.
All right, last of the lightning round. What's one piece of advice you would have for faculty that would improve their lives? Kimberly.
I'm going to shout out, there is a Humanizing STEM course that was funded by the Learning Lab. I think that every time I have supported a faculty in learning how to bring their whole selves, not just their professional selves, but their personal identities and social identities in the classroom, it is a 360-degree win for every single person. So bring yourself into your classrooms, partner with your students. It is a win. It's not easy, but it is one of the easier things you can do.
Great. Yeah, the humanizing course is great. I would say, seek out mentors in the system who can help you kind of navigate the journey of becoming a faculty. I think it's those personal connections that can help you kind of regulate whatever I feel like when you're first starting off teaching, there's the imposter syndrome, but there's a lot of not knowing exactly what you're doing. You may not know your discipline as well as you think you ought to, right? You're like, who am I to be standing here in front of these people pontificating about X, Y, and Z? And then also all the practice pieces. So that kind of just having someone to talk to who is a little bit more experienced is always really useful. And I think it leads to better kind of culture. The network of the school needs to develop, bringing in new people, having the wise elders come in. Even if they're not all on the same page, it's even actually more important because then you can make more changes down the road. If you can build that kind of leadership, mentorship between people, it creates an amazing kind of collegiality that can change schools and build the teams to go do the stuff that your biology department has done. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would echo that, leaning into your professional learning, the opportunity to collaborate with others. I think this space should be everywhere all the time, right? Just what we've all learned from each other. I'm not a math professor, but sitting and listening to my STEM colleagues talk about the work that they're doing, the kind of inquiry that they're developing in their classrooms has been fantastic. And I don't have an opportunity to do that all the time, and we need to be able to do this more regularly and across disciplines.
I think I would echo that. Find a support group, whether that's mentors that have been in the institution longer, or just a group of friends. I think when I was a professor at Sonoma State, we had a group of friends that got together a couple times a month, and we called it Wine and Wine. And we started off as a book club, and that formed valuable relationships, but it was the support group where we could talk about the things we were struggling with, and in some cases, have some vulnerability there too, right? Hey, my mathematician friend, I have to do this integral thing piece, and I haven't taken an integral in a while, and I've got to teach it, and I'm gonna have to do that in front of my students. Can you help me? And be vulnerable in that space. And then the other part I would say is to practice self-care. I think, and this might be part of my STEM, coming out of my STEM background, which was, you were constantly told, you should be here 7 days a week, you should work 60 hours a week, you should not go home, don't do your laundry. If any of those things you did, it was looked down upon as a form of weakness, right? Mm-hmm. And finally, I was like, no, I have to go home, and I'm gonna take a bath, and I'm just gonna light some candles, and I'm going to shut the door, and I'm gonna take care of myself. And so I would say practice that self-care.
All right. Hear, hear.
I was going to just say that I liked that piece on vulnerability. And there's something about you have to have relationships with other people to be vulnerable. Yeah. And those relationships in the classroom, if we're able to be vulnerable with each other, I'm looking over here, there's my Peralta colleagues, the folks that they're here on another grant, but I know them through so many other things, through the faculty diversity internship programs, through all these other relationships. And when you are vulnerable, you are able to learn, you're able to be yourself, you're able to connect with people. And I think maybe that's some of the, maybe that's the thing that we really need to do, is try to figure out how to be vulnerable. And this is why AI is so worrisome, because we feel vulnerable, but we try not to be vulnerable. So then there's all sorts of different emotional reactions we have to that kind of stuff, which is normal, but we can be scared and we can be excited all at the same time. but we have to take care of ourselves as we kind of go through those shifts and stuff, yeah.
Well, and the vulnerability too, you have to remember, has gender and racialized implications, especially with our students, right? So when you're in those classrooms, and we see that in student teaching evaluations, right? We see that there's biases in those evaluative tools, especially if you say, I don't know the answer, let's try and figure this out together as a community of learners, which is what we want to do, but it lands differently if you're a woman of color than, let's say, a white man.
I'm pretty confident that our lightning round has produced the need for 3 more panels, so everybody will need to stay. No, but let's get to some questions from the audience with our last few minutes. Here we go.
Thanks. Really great panel. I want to touch on some comments that a couple of you made. Kimberly talking about the importance of students interacting with each other in the classroom. Scott talking about how students can be a valuable part of the types of discussions that are happening these past couple of days. And also the importance of mentors. And then Shawn, you were talking about obtaining jobs as a measure of student success. Okay, and I'm wondering, in addition to leveraging industry partnerships and those kinds of things, can we leverage our alumni as well? Not necessarily the alumni who are great donors, et cetera, but just people who can come back to the classroom or to the department or the campus and talk about their journeys, because as I think many of us know, our career journeys are not necessarily linear or predictable, and some of us have unintentional career paths. So, and I don't know if that's what you meant, Kimberly. So, but I just wonder what your thoughts are about bringing alumni into this discussion for both mentorship and networking types of contributions. Thanks.
Yeah, I will shout out my dear community college collaborator, Jeff Shinsky at Foothill College, invented something called Scientist Spotlights. And the original intent wasn't necessarily to highlight alumni of various institutions, but that is part of what happens. And it's a way to integrate into every class, like a way that students can see themselves in their home communities and people like them, representation matters, in careers that they might pursue. And there's great data. You can go look at the research articles. But I think absolutely that's the way you can do that in every class. Once again, our department has a ton of things that we got to do better, don't get me wrong. But I'll just shout out, you can find papers, and it has about 50 co-authors. And it's a lot of undergrads who worked on writing those scientist spotlights, a lot of faculty that implement them across the biology curriculum and measure outcomes of belonging. And so absolutely, and that's a great way. You can integrate that into the curriculum without necessarily, no offense to the industry partnerships, right? But you can do that in ways that are really accessible. And all the data we have is that the nearer the peer mentor, the nearer the person is to age, station in life, I should say, the more impactful the stories. And so, and it's a way to bring in not only you teach content, and once again, no offense to the textbook folks or stuff, but you can teach content through the stories of those alumni, right? And those representatives of the world in place of a textbook reading, right? You hear those stories. And so I think that's a wonderful idea, and there are lots of people doing it across the country and the world, and that was an invention from a California community college.
Yeah. What I would say is I was overly reductive in selecting a single faculty member, right, for the purposes of illustration. But I do think that departments and groups of faculty who take on the question of what do our students want when they leave here, and that question is often a job, there's a whole array of tools that are available to solving that educational problem. And it's one that oftentimes I think faculty are reluctant to get into because they think of the employment decision and things outside their control. But I think there's more control maybe than faculty realize sometimes, and that faculty working together, thinking about how to use alumni, thinking about how to use their contacts in the community, et cetera, have tools that maybe are unconsidered, especially when they come together collectively.
May I add to that? That when you talk about alumni, you mentioned, not just the donors, and I think you hit on a good point. Alumni want to give back. They may not be able to give money, and they want to come and give back to the institutions that meant so much to them. They are also in really interesting careers. I mean, the job market is changing so quickly that they are in careers that we couldn't even have envisioned a decade ago. And the opportunity for our students, especially our students who are coming from our low-income first-gen backgrounds, who only think there are 5 jobs you can ever have, really benefit from having our alumni come back. And it's a way for them to give without having to give the money they don't yet have.
Yeah. I have a question in the back.
So I'd like to thank Kimberly for your comments on the interest in the faculty community around improving our teaching. I think you're right that it is much more widely distributed than maybe we kind of give people credit. And I just wanted to mention that I feel like there's like a huge untapped resource because I'm here with 2 close friends of mine, Jennifer, Nina. We've taught together for years at this point, and not once have I ever been in their class and actually seen them teaching. And so, teaching is everyone has their bag of tricks. Everyone has their flair and their style, and it's a big challenge to really understand someone's bag of tricks. You really have to get into their whole mindset and understand it in a deep way. It's not something you can just like take something off the shelf and just plug it into your classroom. It really takes, it's a development cycle, right? And so I just kind of wanted to comment on, like, I feel like there's like this untapped resource that we could be utilizing towards professional development and tapping into that interest that teachers have at professional growth, that we don't have to fly people to UCLA and attend breakout sessions. Like, it's already at our campuses, and we just need to find a way to tap into it. And so I was wondering if the panel could talk a little bit about any experience you have with co-teaching, not just like peer observations. I'm curious about co-teaching and any experience you guys have with like semester-long resource sharing.
Yeah, I'm going to mention a couple things on that. And I was very fortunate to have a work wife when I was at Sonoma State, and her and I regularly visited each other's classes and mind melted together a lot and developing different activities. And then we team taught, and we tried to, and because of just the situation when we came in, everybody retired, and so we kind of grew the whole department, and we tried to infuse that team teaching as much as possible. And as we became leaders in the department, chairs and stuff, we started designing courses around team teaching for that very reason, so that we could spend time at department meetings kind of sharing best practices. And so even if we were going out to conferences, then coming back and sharing those best practices. So I think since there's 3 of you, right, already in a department, to be able to start to team teach those classes. And I know there's logistical conversations when we start talking about team teaching and WTUs and how do you split those. But I think the professional development piece outweighs some of the logistical pieces, because yeah, we would maybe, if it was a 3-unit class, get 1.5 WTUs, but the amount of growth we got was also part of our reward.
Yeah, in my role as a faculty diversity internship program coordinator, one of the things that we kind of tried to scaffold up, so it's not exactly team teaching, like of 2 kind of maybe more experienced faculty, but there'd be a period of observation and then a chance to actually teach. And then for someone who had a graduate or was on their way to a graduate degree and maybe hadn't finished the degree, so that they had both observation, they're building the syllabus, a chance to do a lecture, and then a chance to maybe teach their own class. And it's a great, at least, onboarding activity where you're kind of like sitting there's one thing to sit in class as a student, but it's different to sit in class like as a teacher, as an onboarding teacher, and to do it for a whole semester, maybe not every class, but enough to kind of get a sense of what it's like. So I think it's a great onboarding activity too, if you can do it, if you have a program like that, in addition to trying to do some co-teaching. So I think that's another model, especially for people maybe who don't imagine themselves as being a professor. Like, it's hard, right? Like, so you sit there for the entire semester, and this is kind of what it's like for me, like imagining myself standing up there, like, because you're doing those mental reps. Like, if you talk about in the sports world, I'm not actually practicing, I'm just doing mental reps. But it's a way of kind of doing mental reps in the classroom that's helpful for getting people ready to step in there and be successful in their first semester.
Can I add one more very
Yes,
quick
do
thing?
it.
This
You
thing-
get the last 12 seconds.
I'll say the last thing is that those are both lovely, and I think those are both high output. I think I'm used to being in under-resourced places, and so like the entry point for a lot of folks could be what's called a teaching triad, where the charge is that you just go and visit each other's classes once during the semester, and it is not evaluative. You are going to steal great ideas from your colleagues, and we built those kinds of teaching triads and squares across community colleges and San Francisco State as part of a grant effort, and that built some starting understanding across the segments. And the California Learning Lab has been doing lots of brainstorming about potentially a California-wide teaching and learning collaborative. And oh, wouldn't it be fabulous if we could be in teams regionally across community colleges, CSUs, and UCs, and we could visit one another's classrooms, no judgment, right? No evaluation, not your role, still good ideas, and realize that the students in those classrooms are really, frankly, not very different from one another. I think that would be very powerful, and go California Learning Lab for trying to make that happen.
Very cool. All right, that, I believe, wraps us. Thank you.
All right.
All right.